Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this incredible dialogue that I'm just so happy to bring you on this Friday, August 9th, 2024, including the two gentlemen seen on your screen. Starting with the upper left, I'll introduce Paul Pelletier, former DOJ white collar investigator. Did I mispronounce your name? Did you want to say?
No,
Okay.
you said gentlemen. I just wasn't thinking. I didn't think you were talking about me. But go ahead.
Even better, even better.
We both look behind ourselves.
Right, but a guy that
Exactly.
is one of the good guys, a new untouchable, a gentleman with decades and decades of legal experience as a prosecutor, dealing with some of the most sophisticated white collar crimes in the history of the United States, and he's going to grace us with some of his insight this afternoon, given all that we're going to discuss. And of course, William K. Black, a gentleman that really doesn't need an introduction, but I will say recently retired, but his wife, June Carbone, has a new release of a fantastic book. I understand that has been very successful for you guys. And I'll create a link on the bottom of this for you to have access to her incredible book. And Bill, we can discuss that briefly. But um, I find myself at this stage of this crazy sort of pinball, I don't know, reactionary circus to like so much that happens on a daily basis, let alone a weekly basis. I just want to set the stage here, and then I'll kind of let you guys run with it. But it was only about 3 weeks ago that we were in a situation where we were trying to discern if President Biden was going to have enough of a sort of stamina or dynamism to come back from the unfortunate performance in the debate with Donald Trump, which was creating all sorts of ripples of controversy within the Democratic Party and so forth. And there was a moment where President Biden had this incredible performance in Detroit, where he basically appeared ready and willing to go the distance. And then the next day, of course, Donald Trump was shot, or whatever that is at this stage of the game. But of course, that happened. And then shortly after that, given things in Israel and assassination of the PLO, or I should say Hamas leadership and so forth, just so much things are happening. But then it, of course, suddenly the tide shifted. President Biden had said that he would not be running, and the baton got passed immediately to Vice President Kamala Harris, and then just a couple of days ago,
Kamala.
Kamala.
Come.
Kamala, that's
like
what
comma.
got it, Kamala. But it's beautiful to see a Bill here, because of course you were a professor at the University of Minnesota as well, although I bet you're about to say recently retired, but I'll go into that. UKMC recently retired, but Minnesota, yes. Okay. But obviously your governor, who has really provided just a shot in the arm, in addition to Ms. Harris, to the Democratic candidacy, given all things that I've just laid out, because of course Tim Walz, who is just this plain-spoken, former educator and football coach, and a guy that obviously is going to bring a lot of value to the ticket. But I do have to kind of set up the first question to you, Bill. Given what we kind of know about Eric Holder, who was the point person on the decision, can you kind of give me your thought about the whole situation?
Well, it's not politics per se, isn't my area of expertise, but I think it's a good choice. What he said is true. Minnesota is a place that has very considerable harmony. The Democrats and the Republicans still work together on a number of things. It has, I think, the lowest unemployment rate in the United States. It has a significant influx of people with advanced degrees. So it is heart of the Midwest. It's a diverse within the state politically and such. He comes from a very Republican area of Minnesota. He was in the Guard and rose to the highest rank, an NCO can be. That's really extraordinary, that rank. If you know the military, it's a really big deal. He won, the marksmanship contests in Congress. So he's still sharp on those things. And who knew? He has a wicked sense of humor. And so that is just a delightful thing. And he's on the attack, and he's a happy warrior, as opposed to, everything is going to be a disaster all the time. And meanwhile, Trump is trashing America in every single speech he gives. So it's a nice contrast.
And lying while he does it, obviously.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, so Trump is the genesis of this talk in some ways, just as he's an exemplar of the folks that Paul and I have had to deal with much of our professional lives. And so when Vice President Harris says, I know that type, I was a state attorney general. I'll speak for myself. I'm going, yeah, I know this type. This is a classic, what we call in the white collar criminology biz, elite control, fraud, and predator, right? And what's distinctive about those folks is that they have the seeming legitimacy of being the CEO, but in fact are using it as a criminal enterprise. So you use the firm as camouflage, as a sword, and a shield. And what in particular you can do with a firm is politicians, it's chump change from the standpoint of a meaningful corporation. And so you build predatory networks. You should get, Trump often screws up here, top lawyers. Often Trump hires abysmally poor lawyers. You can get top accounting firms. Trump's a cheap guy, so he hires fourth tier law accounting firms. And the one he picks for his SPAC, that's a special purpose acquisition corporation, with his True Social, well, there ain't no truth, and it's completely unsocial, right? Those folks were just driven out of business by the SEC because they flunked every audit. The SEC did like 22 audits, and they were 0 for 22. You can't even stay in single A ball with a batting average like that, type of thing. But among the folks you bring in to this predatory network, of course, are politicians, judges. In my day as a financial regulator, our standard joke was the highest return on assets is always a political contribution, right? These are from the thrift looters. Nowadays, the highest return on assets is always suborning a Supreme Court justice. And it turns out they come really cheap, much cheaper. And there are only 9 of them, and you only need 5. Right? So it's what you do. Okay. So these folks have 2 prominent traits, which are somewhat at war often, right? One, they act strategically. They're not like, the guy that gets high and he has no control of anything and he just does the stupidest criminal thing and gets caught for the 12th time, right? But the second thing that's in tension with that is the key is not genius, it's audacity. These are the people, I'll let Paul tell his own stories, but they never confess, the really elite ones. They do one more preposterous lie after the other. And when you catch them in 6 sequential lies, they add 7 new lies. And they think they're really clever. Now, they are susceptible to folks like us, but it's a huge amount of work. It's a huge amount of resources. And we are systematically at the Supreme Court level, in the halls of Congress, in what passes for regulatory agencies, creating more intensely criminogenic environments in which you can steal enormous amounts of money in brazen ways over a career of 35 to 40 years. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court will create out of nothing a new doctrine that says, well, actually, we are a monarchy. And yeah, the president really is more of a king. And that joke about shooting people on Fifth Avenue? No, you can really do that. As long as it's in the arguably outer penumbra of your powers. And they didn't use the example in the Supreme Court argument. Wait a minute, you mean you can assassinate the Supreme Court justices?
Mm-hmm.
Look, you're a baseball fan, Paul, and I'm thinking to myself, just when it couldn't get any worse. I mean, we're talking about the worst, season of the Cubs in history, whatever that may be. But kind of picking up on where Bill left off, but also to incorporate your kind of a state of the state, if you don't mind. I mean, where do you go with that? Every time I keep thinking to myself, it can't get any worse. It does, but yet there is hope, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are so many levels to what Bill just talked about. It's hard to sort of know where to jump in, but I'll jump in sort of at the bottom, which is, while we spent a lot of time in the Department of Justice early in my career attacking elite fraud, and we've talked about that in prior episodes, and Bill's talked about sort of on the regulatory side and on the financial side how they did it. But it's always more difficult to go after sort of elite fraud, right? Because it's difficult. I don't consider Donald Trump an elite fraudster at all. I consider him a grifter of the type that usually finds a way to get tangled up in law enforcement. And the problem with Donald Trump, first of all, he's in a notorious racket, which is New York real estate, right? And so there's not a lot of accountability there, number one. And so he's the perfect example of what happens when you don't hold people accountable for their crimes. There were so many opportunities in his career where if someone just did their job as a prosecutor, they could have prosecuted him for a multitude of things. One of them was Soho, where they were lying about the amount of condos that had actually been sold. His attorneys donated to the district attorney, and it was an active prosecutable case there, and they closed the case. The Trump University, another example of just an outrageous fraud, that if someone just had picked up the grand jury subpoena book and started issuing subpoenas in a criminal way and held the guy accountable, it could have staunched a lot of what has transpired since. So I just see him as the perfect example of what happens when you don't hold grifters accountable. And it's not that difficult. It's not that complicated. He is not smart in any way, shape, or form, although he's conniving and cunning, and he's now moved into a sphere where he has other people to protect him. So I just like to start off by saying that he's the perfect example of what happens when you don't hold people accountable and what can happen, right? And then, so the second thing I'd like to say is that should he be elected president again, for all kinds of reasons, which we could spend the next 10 hours talking about, it is game over in a lot of ways for what Bill and I did for a living, and that is just doing effective law enforcement against sort of high-level fraudsters. It's not going to happen. So if Kamala Harris and Tim take over, I think that we have a different conversation that's much more akin to the conversation we've been having about whether or not these people have been captured by the wealthy moneyed interests and corporations in the United States, and whether they're going to tackle it. If it's Trump, it's not even a discussion. If it's these two people, I think it's a discussion. I think that the wonderful points are that the governor of Minnesota is a terrific human being. He just is not your typical politician. The bad side of that is he's got United Health Group in his backyard, and they are notorious for pushing the limits on regulations and the law. And so you just wonder, is it like the financial industry in Connecticut, where the sort of the governor and the senators have sort of in Delaware, where they've been sort of captured by this. So I think the discussion is completely different depending upon who wins in November. And I think, you know, for the first time in my last 8 years, I think I've been hopeful as to where we're going, but who knows?
Okay, well, I got to pick up on that just because of the collective experience of what I've learned from you guys. But, you know, the first thing I want to comment on just really quickly before I get into it is that for people who don't recognize the accent, Paul is another guy from Massachusetts. One of the only honest purveyors of information, given the scope of what he's allowed to do, is my favorite Lawrence O'Donnell, who comes at it every single night and he just pounds Trump for the lies and the grift and everything else. But more importantly, what O'Donnell is doing now is calling out the media for not holding Trump to account by allowing him to do what he did in that debate with Biden a few weeks ago, which is he lies so fast that nobody stops him, nobody calls him out on it, and yada yada
By
yada.
giving him an hour of free airtime yesterday, an hour and a half of free airtime to spew nonsense yesterday.
Nonsense, just lie and lie and lie and lie. But coming back to that though, and because of what you just mentioned, it interesting. You put another rub on Mr. Walz that I know you're a professional. I mean, excuse me, the ultimate expert in Medicare fraud. I think it is, going back to your time in Florida, particularly. But you know, I don't know if I have to bring it up, guys. Look, Holder was the point guy on making this decision. We know that Kamala she exemplifies, she's an intelligent woman. She comes from a relatively regular family. Obviously, education was very important to her, but it wasn't like she was concocted in a white shoe law firm that had to actually be simpatico with the financial system, for example. You know, neither one of, well, I should say, obviously, Walz isn't that guy. But, you know, I bring up Holder given everything that we know, and he was the point person for making the decision. And we also know that Miss Harris, of course, had a controversial relationship with none other than Trump's former Treasury Secretary, Mnuchin. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Can you kind of pick up on some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, Bill, let me start and then I'll hand it over to you if you don't mind. So two things that I think Bill will agree with me on. Number one, Eric Holder's not sinister. Okay, he does what he behaves the way we've seen him behave. He has strong points and he has weak points. I think those weak points that he showed in not dealing with the great financial crisis were not born out of a sinister mind, but I think that the problem with Washington always has been, whether you're Democrat or Republican, you're a member of the club. And the reality is, once you get in that club, it's hard to reach outside the club to get people in positions of power that are outside the club that are willing to start throwing wrenches around and making noise and dealing with some of the problems that need to be tackled with in a way that people in the club don't deal with those types of problems. So I think that Eric Holder has the club problem. The question, I believe, is whether or not Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will deal with it I love the fact that Tim's there because he's not a member of that club. I mean, he seems to be like the real deal guy who is in it for all the right reasons and has not been corrupted. School's still out a little bit on Kamala. That being said, it's never a perfect. Politics is never perfect. So I'm certainly interested in Bill's position on this, but that's the way I look at it.
Bill, do you want to pick it up, or do you want me to tee it up? Because I got
so the famous phrase is famous for a good reason. Don't let the search for the perfect become the enemy of the good. Right? I don't see a perfect person when I look in the mirror. So are people going to make things potentially better, or are they going to make things worse? So for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which are random in this sense. So 9/11 had a terrible effect on the availability of FBI resources on elite white collar crime cases, right? That was not some corporate plot, but we could have fixed it at any time. We're an incredibly rich country, and by the way, the economy is doing super well. So we could relatively easily, far more easily than any other nation in the world, repair that lack of resources. There was an enormous hit job, 2 enormous hit jobs by the Republicans against the IRS. And the IRS is important to elite white collar prosecutions. First, a lot of the motivations and the way you optimize the more sophisticated frauds involve tax fraud as well. Second, the IRS tax accountants are some of the best forensic accountants in the entire. In fact, I think they are the best forensic accountants in the entire world, at least in my era. They were that level good, or among those teams, they were that level good. That's an extraordinary resource nobody has. Our ability to do plea deals, our ability to use the grand jury, the institutional glory in some ways of the Justice Department, which both my wife and I were Justice Department attorneys at parts of our career as well. That institutional desire of the overwhelming bulk, not everybody, but the overwhelming bulk of folks to try to do things for the American people, there's no counterpart. Like, the Serious Frauds Office in the United Kingdom is parodied all the time, as the Seriously Funny Office. They actually hired a review by a former U.S. prosecutor who had become a judge, and she'd retired. And she said her takeaway was, de facto, they have legalized elite white collar crime in the United Kingdom. And that remains true today. It is difficult to explain to people the successes of the Department of Justice in the savings and loan debacle in the Enron era. There is no other nation with a real rule of law. In other words, the People's Republic of China periodically, does 1,000 people for corruption, but none of it's real, right? There's no justice system and such. We actually follow the justice system in those prosecutions, and we still succeed. And we've talked in a prior one about the importance of training and the fact that the Department of Justice actually, in many eras, has taken that seriously. And both of us have been involved personally in that training to do the elite white collar prosecutions and such. And I think from our prior talks that we both have almost a reverence for the folks who you'll never hear of. You could have a 2,000-hour documentary, and you would never hear of those people. right?
Yep.
But they're critically important in doing these things. So we can succeed. We could have a Project 2025 to restore the rule of law.
By the way,
right?
I call that go ahead.
An alternative, right? That wouldn't be hidden, that wouldn't be funded by major corporations. Any experienced attorneys who have been as part of the federal system, such as Paul, myself, and 1,000 others, can tell you how to destroy the system. There are lots of points that you can go at that you'll never see outside. And a few key appointments, wrecking the inspector generals, installing ombudsmen who are really there just to destroy. You know, we could be clever about this, actually more clever than the 2025 folks are, right? That, by the way, apparently Opus Dei, the guy that resigned. So these are fascist conspirators of 80 plus years of experience. So we can have a completely above board, open to everybody what we're trying to do and why to restore the rule of law. But that would have many things that you might think had nothing much to do with the law. We would actually fix regulation because regulators are, invaluable in terms of the criminal referral. Again, the criminal referral system that works so well to produce the record number of elite white collar prosecutions, eliminated and never restored by folks like Holder, right? So if again, I would pick Holder over so many other folks. He's not the devil incarnate. He didn't set out to destroy the rule of law. That was never his mission. And I've worked, for example, with a chief counsel who came from Covington, one of the absolute top firms. And he was wrath of God against crooks, right? He helped us transform. Worked with Tim Ryan, Meg's first cousin, now a very, trade association type guy. He lost his job knowingly by bringing the enforcement action against the sitting president's son.
So Bill touches upon something that you've touched upon in the past with our collective discussions and relationship, given what we did in the Con. And I'm referring to you, Paul, in this situation. But I want to tee this up first because I interpret what Bill just said as the clean new deal. And I would love more than anything that to have you two specifically design what your bill is suggesting, right? Given all that's going on that we're trying to maybe suss out in a very short period of time on this conversation, given all the challenges that we have. But yes, that is the answer to Project 2025. And ultimately, Paul, you had an idea of a Manhattan-like project to reestablish the law for white-collar criminals. Particularly, can you pick up on what Bill just said and suggest where you would start this, given the collective lay of the land?
Well, yeah. So the first place to start is where Bill focused on, and that's with the IRS. I started off my career in the Department of Justice with the tax division. And when he says they have the best of the best, they really do. I was absolutely amazed. We had special agents on the criminal side and revenue agents on the civil side. They would do the auditing. And I found, having worked with both of them, I found them exceptional, but there weren't enough of them. And the size of the IRS in terms of their capacity with special agents and revenue agents dwindled over the years. I started in the 80s, and I think when I left in the 2011, there were less revenue agents and special agents than when I started. So the Republicans have consistently, and they do it today. We read stories about how all their legislation proposals or all the the proposals to enact any type of financial legislation start off with they want to defund or repeal Biden's 75,000 agent. I think it was 75,000, but is whatever the amount of agents he was bringing back in the IRS and he obtained funding for. And every project, every financial piece of legislation starts off with taking money away from the IRS. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I mean, I get it on some level, but I don't get it on the biggest
Make
level.
money. We make money on the agents.
Right. They are. I think when I was in the civil tax division, they had done a study, and we had brought in 15 times the revenue that were expended in our cases, 15 times the revenue. So if we expended $1 on a case, we would bring in 15. So it is just, it's not even revenue neutral. It is huge. And on the criminal side, it's exponentially more. So I think you literally, you start off with those, because you cannot do a financial crimes case without the IRS. You just cannot. And so I think that's where you start. I think that they're geared to it. They're not afraid of numbers. I'm sorry, I've dealt with the FBI for too long. They're just not of the ilk that IRS special agents are. So I think that's where you start off. I think you continue to hire more. I think you empower them to do audits of, real estate firms, all the places, financial services firms, and particularly individuals, the billionaires in our country, who live their life by finding unique ways to not pay taxes. And so, you're going to be focusing on individuals who aren't paying taxes. You're going to be focusing on corporations that aren't paying taxes, or that are doing, some type of financial crimes, whether it be on the trading desks or whether it be in banks and traditional financial institutions. But we're not tackling that. And then the final aspect of it would be finding a way to use all of the resources that we have that are provided by the Bank Secrecy Act, all of the information that we have about financial transactions that pass through U.S. financial institutions that we do nothing with. And I've said this for years. Someone steals your credit card and they use it at a gas station in Poughkeepsie for a $30 purchase. Within 4 minutes, you're getting a phone call that someone's using your credit card. I mean, there are ways to create algorithms to deal with this shit. And we being the federal agencies that deal with this are so far behind the 8 ball. And it's because they're not growing into the crimes. And we haven't even mentioned non-traditional currency, right? We haven't even mentioned blockchain. We haven't mentioned anything crypto, and that's 3 levels above what they're really doing right now in terms of tackling financial crime. So there are so many crimes out there in the elite space that they're not dealing with. If you created some rock and roll teams around the country, you could really make a dent on a lot of it.
Well, I mean, my mind is swimming with the potential of what the power of your collective experiences could compel to the Harris ticket in the event that we could build critical mass, for example, right? A couple of things, like you just had mentioned, I don't know why they're not doing it now. Well, the first thing that goes in my head, that's because billionaires run the system, first and foremost. I mean, all you got to do is look at everything that Elon Musk is getting away. I may as well just ask this question while I have it on, even though my mind wasn't going this direction. But guys, Elon Musk and Twitter, or X, is getting away with slander, defamation, intimidation, millions of cases by the second through fake accounts that I can observe in no time. If I had resources, I guarantee I could go to Marjorie Taylor Greene and figure out. It looks like Prigozhin. It looks like, what it was it called back in 2016, IBM, right? What the Russians were doing with the troll bot farms, with the Mercers and yada yada yada. Guys, can you just give me your feeling about a billionaire like Musk and this propaganda platform called X?
Okay, so I'm teaching class these days in crypto and such, and it isn't simply that the millionaire class runs everybody. Yes, they have some very substantial influence in both parties. Yes, in the first put up job of alleged victims of a rapacious IRS, to his shame, Bill Clinton turned on the government employees who were the subject of these lies and threw them over under the bus, backed it up over them, ran it forward over them, backed it up over them, and created all these legislative changes that are a disaster. It's not perfectly parallel. For 30 years, the Republicans, particularly in the House, have waged a war to ensure that the SEC and the Commodity Future Trading Commission cannot be effective, cannot afford to get even enough computing power to be able to even investigate after the fact high frequency trading, right? They explicitly don't want the government agencies to have the capacity to be effective regulators. And they just openly do this. As I said, it's now at least 30 years. As Paul said, they have an unholy war against the IRS, particularly the IRS functions that deal with elite cheats. And here we got to bring in two of our old friends, Gresham's dynamic, right? In the Gresham's dynamic, if you gain a competitive advantage by cheating, then market forces become perverse. And bad ethics can drive good ethics out of the marketplace because you can't compete if the other folks ain't paying any taxes, right? That's an insane incentive system. Everybody honest should be able to agree that we have to eliminate that. As Paul said, we know how to do this. We even still have a number of the folks who know how to do this in the trenches. And again, back to training, right? It's not just you hire people, you actually train them. and then you actually bring cases and they get experience in training them. And then you build on that process, right? And you back them up when they take on the powerful people, because the powerful people are always going to then say, oh, it's terrible. And we have a Supreme Court justice who's just written a book that's all about, hey, really, why should we have white collar crimes? And that's our second friend, right? That French guy from centuries ago that said, when Frederic Bastiat, when plunder becomes a way of life for men in society, they create a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that valorizes it, right? That's precisely what we are seeing. And the Supreme Court has been this thing valorizing the absolute worst stuff, including blatant bribery. I used to say, it's important if you're trying to do this and get away with it, not to show the quid pro quo. But in the latest cases, you can say, hey, I delivered for you. You should give me political contributions to incentivize me to deliver future goodies to you. And the Supreme Court majority says, well, that's not a quid pro quo. That's not illegal. That's just normal, because in their lives it is. And in the lives of the patrons that put them on the court, it is. And the people that give them all these freebie trips, it's the norm. It's become the norm on the Supreme Court for at least 3 of these justices to get that quid pro quo. So of course they're going to say it's legal and that it's perfectly ethical and that they're the ones who will judge their ethics, and they think it's just peachy to have those kinds of things. So yes, we not unique to Paul and me or anything. There are a bunch of us that can do these things, explain how you can, the things you wouldn't think about, the IRS, forensic auditor types, for example. People outside, they wouldn't even know they exist. And there are many people that have this area of expertise. And if they, if the Dems wanted to actually run a substantive thing about, yeah, we love America, we love the rule of law, let's bring it back for everybody, especially the ultra wealthy, then it would become more difficult for them. I mean, nobody would be pure still, but it becomes more difficult for Dems to say, oh, yeah, and then, take it all on the side.
Well, I mean, you just combined kind of the question that I asked without answering it yet, which I'm going to put you on the hot seat for that one, Paul, because I saw you kind of shaking your head. But initially, you said this is what happens when you don't hold somebody accountable, i.e., Trump. Okay, Gresham's dynamic, all of the rest of it, and we didn't hold him to account, and now we've got, to Bill's point, in addition to everything else, a former president who I saw lead an insurrection based on the way I interpret the 14th Amendment, Section 3. I don't know how anybody couldn't, given what we saw at the Capitol. But ultimately, that, and again, I'm not to your level of expertise. I'm just talking about a layman interpreting what I read in the Constitution, given what I actually saw, and given the other nomenclature of propaganda that followed from Fox News, which incidentally paid $797 million because of Rupert Murdoch's The Big Lie. But what does that have to do with the insurrection? Well, everything, right? Because going back to Elon, the guy is not held accountable, and we have a platform of, he would have just called you, his head would have exploded, Trump, hearing what you two just said, and you guys would be on the receiving end of millions of accounts, fake accounts, on X saying you're communist, for example.
Give me 30 seconds. In the first term, we were saved by the fact that Trump is an idiot, and he's the laziest idiot that I've run across. But what all the grifters have learned is, well, he'll do whatever we want. We just got to actually have the real plan and the real presidency, and we can do it in ways that, again, are not very visible. They're 7th level type things in a bureaucracy that will render a law enforcement entity completely ineffective. That's what a second term is going to bring.
So, Paul, my first question remains, but just to kind of blend in, I mean, because we're going to have another 9 minutes before we probably cancel. Like you said, we could, at the outset, we could talk for 80 hours, and I hope we can talk more about this. And by the way, I just watched Jaws last night. So thinking like Bruce and Jaws, how are we going to take out corruption given all of the stuff that we just talked about?
So I think, in my world and the way I think of things, it all starts with it begins and ends with the legal system. You can say all you want about Trump and everything and Elon Musk, but it all begins and ends with the legal system. And so, and the judicial system, right? So what Trump has done is he's trying to delegitimize both our right to vote and the respect and the confidence people should have in the system of elections in this country and in our justice system, right? He's tried to delegitimize both, right? He shit on the FBI and he shit on the judges. But we know in the first term that it was our judges, for the most part, that kept him from going completely off track, right? They filed 60 lawsuits against the election, and all, I want to say 59 out of 60 said you're full of shit, right? So it was our legal system, to me, that was sort of the lifeboat for our democracy, at least at the end of his term and probably throughout his whole term. The problem is he saturated our legal system with shitty right-wing lunatic judges, right? And number two, we have this corruption on the Supreme Court that's been evident now for some time, and every day we find out more crap about it. So we have the rank and file justice system that everybody deals with, right? You arrest somebody today, you arrest somebody tomorrow. He's tried to delegitimize that. We should spend a lot of time, like Bill said, fixing it, training, empowering people to do that job. And then number two, we need to fix the court system. What does that mean? Well, if the Democrats can hold on to take the seat again and hold on to it for another couple of terms, we can potentially get enough judges. Not that Republican judges are all bad, but when you take them all from the same pot, the Federalist Society, you're going to get a bent that is not what America wants, and that is people that are just calling balls and strikes. And then we need to fix the Supreme Court. You fix that by putting in competent judges consistently. And then over a length of time, Trump crammed in a ton of them. Hopefully the Democrats can hold the Senate. Hopefully they can hold the presidency, and that process will go forward. And then they have to fix the court. And if one of his plans is to change a judge every 2 years, right? And to have an 18-year term for judges. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a wonderful thing. So if we don't continue to ensure that our court system works and that people have faith in it, I think all bets are off. I mean, it's just, we all know it's a two-tier system of justice already, but you have to at least stabilize things for us before you can start working on that, in my view.
Well, and Bill, and lastly to you, to kind of carry us out, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation moving forward. But, Bill, recently it just dropped, and I know it was there throughout, but this revelation that Bill Barr was sitting on what Mueller had on the Egyptian backdoor to the Trump election in 2016, this $10 million payment and the strange currency and everything else that, in Lawrence O'Donnell's words, was like, would have been the largest presidential, debacle in history had that gone forward and the Justice Department pursued it. But again, Barr blocked it. Okay. And we can continue to go on. Bill, it seems like we're in a crisis situation. It's great that the Democrats have got new energy and that there is a strong ticket, but you guys are the experienced guys that we've got to get the message to the powers that be that something needs to be done. What level are we at in terms of everything that Paul just basically spelled out?
Okay, so I'm going to end on an optimistic note, a la our governor and such, that we can do things. It was spectacularly popular to prosecute the savings and loan crooks, right? And while the Reagan Bush 1 administration had been hostile initially, they came to embrace it. And we knew we had won when one of the sleaziest members of the House, a Democrat, wore a button that was literally 6 inches in diameter that said, "Jail the SNL crooks." Now, it was pure cynicism on his part, but he'd gotten the message, right? When we adopted the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, we were mocked globally. The Germans were laughing at us and saying, "Great, we'll eat your lunch," in global competition. But now the EU has a requirement that you have a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, because it turned out it was spectacularly popular to go after this terrible corruption. But again, there's no such thing as a decisive battle. Every generation has to be part of this struggle. It is the quintessential American struggle to leave the nation better off than when we began this process. Here's how you can do it: by burnishing the rule of law so that honest people can prosper and crooked people either end up in prison or they end up deterred and wanting to do bad things. But I will tell you, the New York Bar Association said we should gut the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and not very long ago. And in the first term, one of President Trump's initiatives in the campaign was to gut the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
He said it was
And he
anti-competitive.
was unable to do that because, again, it was so incredibly popular with the public, and saying, I want corruption doesn't work very well for any elected official. Unfortunately, it works for Supreme Court justices. They don't face election and they have life tenure.
But if you remember, his Secretary of State was the former CEO of Exxon Mobil, and he was a huge advocate of the FCPA. Huge advocate.
And that was the first term where Trump made those kind of mistakes.
Correct. Correct.
In the second term, they ain't going to be those folks anywhere in the
No. He's learned.
All the guardrails will be gone, and the people will be, and this is the fundamental thing, these are all people who lie. They lie all the time. They lie about almost everything. And as Paul said, the journalists mostly just let them do it. It's extraordinary.
Right. Okay. So go ahead. Sorry.
So we have to actually value the truth. And that's what I always found in people that I could work with. Did they value the truth? Did they value America and the things that made it such a special place?
Liberty,
so we're not,
yeah.
This is the optimism. When you have a rule of law, it's better for almost everybody. Look what's happening to the People's Republic of China. It is crashing and burning because there is no rule of law, and lying became everything. And our governor, the Communist Party, really believes in telling your neighbors what to do about almost everything.
Well, I'm going to do everything I can to try to get you guys back to continue this forward, because I see there's a utility here to be able to try to get this message to the powers that be, because this can get more refined and so forth. But last question, even though we're out of time, and I've got to just maybe get a quick answer from you guys, because we discussed this with David K. Johnston, Bill, and then to you, Paul. So we're going to have sentencing coming up here with Trump on the 34 felony convictions. Should he go to jail?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's
so,
not going to happen.
Sentencing is about, teaching other people. First of all, seeing if you've atoned for it, right? You're the convicted criminal, and also sending a message to other people, right? Which is, so you're held accountable. You have either admitted responsibility or not. And what are we going to tell other people about these crimes and what happens when you commit it? And because he's not atoned for it, he's not done anything to admit that he committed a crime, you have to send him to jail, to send a message to other people as well. So you have to. I don't think he's going to go to jail for a long time. He's certainly not going to get a life sentence, but he, 4 to 6 months is where I think the range is where that judge is going to send him to jail. And guess what? It would be Rikers Island because it's a state crime in New York. That's where he would go.
Did you just say you think it's going to happen?
Yeah, I think this judge is not afraid.
And Bill,
I will tell you this: he almost has to sentence him to jail, in my view.
well, okay, but
Remember, he's not going to go to jail. He's going to appeal it, and it's just going to. He's not going to like go to jail tomorrow. It's not like going to be Steve Bannon. But he'll appeal it. But at the end of the day, he'll have to go to jail. I believe he's going to get a jail sentence. Personally, I think he's a real judge.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, guys, thank you for your time. And wow, all I can say is let's look forward to the next one, guys. Thank you so much. Have a terrific weekend.
Thank you for having us. Good to see you, Bill.
Take care.